right. Welcome to another episode of the Attorney Lounge. I want to thank Stephanie Clerkin for visiting us here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Stephanie is the Director of Litigation Support at Korein Tillery. Did I say that correctly?
You actually did. Congrats.
I did my research. I was trying to be accurate on that, but appreciate you coming on. You are in St. Louis, and so we have a little bit in common because I'm from sort of the same area. I'm from Kansas City, and I have been starting the show off a little bit with kind of a curveball question that's maybe not directly on topic. So given that we're both kind of from around the Ozark area, my question for you is, do you feel like Marty is a hero or a villain in the show Ozark?
So with a disclaimer is I have the last season to watch still. But,
okay.
But I've been through three of the four. But I wouldn't call him a villain at all. So I don't know if I'd call him a hero though either. So that's a tough one. I'm not sure if the last season's going to change my mind or not, but
yeah. Well, in some ways you might want to call him a victim. I don't know. Yeah. Depends on how you want to look at things. But I sort of struggle. It was kind of like Breaking Bad for me a little bit. You think you're sort of like rooting for this guy, but then you kind of questioning yourself in the middle of the show going, wait a second, should I be rooting for this guy or against this guy? I don't know anymore.
Although I shouldn't say I'm a big Ruth fan, though. Her character is my favorite, I think, in the whole series.
I agree with you. Ruth, to me, is the star of the show. And so, yeah. Okay. So I won't go any further down that on that topic because I don't want to ruin it for you. It's a good, I would say the last season was a little bit of a grind to get through for me, but we sort of knocked it out and I'm glad we did to sort of at least see how things kind of wrapped up. So let me know what you think after you watch the final season. Okay. So the way we kind of work the show, I think starting out, want to get to know you a little bit and where you grew up and kind of how you kind of navigated into law as a career. And then talk a little bit about your career and some things in the industry. So starting with that, just about you and your background, like tell us a little bit about where you grew up and went to school and kind of that path that you navigated into the legal industry.
Yes. So like you mentioned, I'm in St. Louis and I've been here my whole life. I grew up 15 minutes from where I live today and went to college here as well. Partially because I was paying 100% of my college while working almost full time in high school and college. So I didn't really have a choice, but it all works out. I'm one of the few, I think, in this industry that did 2 years at community college and then transferred into a 4-year school in finance, of all things, nothing to do with legal at this point. I graduated from St. Louis University and then spent 7 years in the accounting, finance, consulting world before joining Korein Tillery 10 and a half years ago. And when I started here, I had almost no legal exposure, except that some of my old bosses were testifying experts on the accounting finance side, and I helped build damage models, forensic type investigations. So I knew a little bit of terminology with legal, but not much at all. So, and the role I took didn't exist. When I joined, it was a project management role. No one ever had it. So there was no in-house training. So it kind of it was a trial by fire. And here we are 10 years later.
Well, it's funny because this theme has sort of come up on the show repeatedly with people I've talked to you just kind of sort of navigate life and you sort of fall into one thing or another and you just happen kind of where you're at. I mean, you can sort of set your path in a certain direction, but you never quite know where it's going to end up. And the attorneys I've talked to just don't necessarily, a lot of them didn't set out to be an attorney. They just sort of through one circumstance or another ended up finding themselves in the legal industry. Sounds like you kind of ended up in that same boat.
Yes. It's the running joke since I've joined e-discovery world is nobody went to school for e-discovery. Now maybe people do, but traditionally that wasn't really a thing.
Yep. Well, backing up just a little bit too, I'm just gonna tell you too that I also have my associate's degree from Butler County Community College in Kansas. I played baseball there for 2 years before transferring to KU and going to school there. So I'm with you on that. And then I was going to ask you too, I can't recall what I recall about Lou was that it's a really good it's got a really good basketball team, and I cannot it's escaping me what the mascot is.
You mean you can't remember a Billiken?
The Billiken. I wanted to say the Pelicans or something. I knew it was something like that. Okay.
Kind of were close there, but yes, Billikens.
So great school. And so when you started, like you said, you started in finance at an accounting firm, if I recall. How did that, like, what kind of work were you doing there, and kind of so you said damages experts, working with them. Is that kind of then like go into a little bit more detail if you could, and tell us kind of how that sort of, you connected those dots into litigation support?
Yeah, when I started, I was doing more business valuations for like estate planning purposes. They're very small projects, and slowly worked my way into doing more with data intensive projects. And back in, oh gosh, what year are we now? In 2008, 2009, my old firm, Reuben Brown, had some software. It was called IDEA, and it was used for data analytics. And I really just loved that program. And we ended up incorporating it into some of the audit groups work. So while they're doing just the normal year-end audit, I might have joined them and helped analyze payroll data, looking at expense accounts, looking for just variations, and we'd flag them for them. Or maybe it turned into a bigger investigation. There was always a fine line between, is it incompetence or is it fraud? And sometimes both, sometimes neither. But I was working on a lot of these smaller projects. And then around 2010, I ended up being assigned to work on what turned into the largest project my group, and actually the firm itself, had ever seen. And it went on for almost 2 years. So this is complete opposite of these 20-hour, 40-hour projects. And after working on that, I worked hand in hand with a lot of the attorneys on it, even had a temporary office at one of the law firms local.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when that ended, I realized I don't think I can go back to smaller type projects and cases, and that I was one of the crazy people that enjoy millions of documents and data in these long-term projects. And they were well aware I was looking at other roles, because that didn't really exist long-term where I was. And ended up through a referral from one of our, main partners where I am now. He said he had a buddy over here that was, they were looking for a project management role. They had no idea what it was going to look like or any of that. And to just go talk to him, and it all worked out.
Yeah. And here you are. So you've been with Korein Tillery for how long now?
10.5 years.
Wow. And so, did you start in this role then when you went over there? Had this role existed before that?
No. So there was no role. So when I started, my title was project manager, which is basically what I still am now, because it's, what I do is still project management. Even though I am head of the department, it's still basically me plus a couple others that fill in here and there. Knock on wood, training goes well, and I'll have an actual dedicated second person now. But yeah, there really was no, here's how to learn your role. It was more, okay, you're here, you don't know anybody, you don't know any of the cases. How are you going to manage a case, when you don't know any of that? So I kind of just had to make it my own. And coincidentally, there was a new e-discovery platform installed like the week before I started, and nobody really knew how to use it. And they said, you said you like playing with technology. Here you go. See if you can figure this out. And eventually we ended up switching to Relativity 3 months later. And so that became kind of my baby. And then I learned it from the ground up over 10 years now. So I can do some of that in my sleep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you say project manager, it's funny because I feel like even, attorneys, right, should be called project managers, because it's not like you work on the same project. It's not like you're moving from discrete project to discrete project. I mean,
exactly.
when I started, I didn't know what I was doing either. I mean, I went to law school, and then I get thrown into these transactions, and they're like, "Hey, you're going to be working on schedules on a big merger agreement." It's like, okay, well, I guess we'll have lunch on Thursday. I'm like, I don't even know what schedules are, right? So you learn all this stuff by getting thrown into the deep end of the pool, and you just sort of figure it out. And so,
I actually Googled what is e-discovery when I started.
Right.
It was a term I'd heard, but not like as a formal category, I guess I should say. I mean, it ended up being, I did know what it was. I didn't know the description.
Yeah.
I still find myself Googling legal terms these days, like what's a Rule 16 conference, or pick a random phrase.
We all do. That's the secret. We're all Googling and trying to figure it out as we go. So yeah, that's the same here. Always trying to learn and figure things out and tackling new stuff. And one of the things we kind of talked about though, and you've developed a name for yourself and a reputation in the e-discovery industry. And we've talked about that. Like this is somewhat of a brand new industry where everybody that's sort of in this industry right now is essentially a founder. And we're all figuring it out. I've only been in it for 10 months. I've been a GC for over 20 years, but the world of e-discovery, as I dig deeper into it, it's very intricate, it's vast, and there's a lot of people that are involved, and we're all sort of figuring it out as we go because this industry didn't exist, 15 years ago? So yeah, I mean, I think we're all kind of in that same boat. So it doesn't surprise me that that's kind of where you ended up when you started there.
It also was some good groundwork because since I started and have a lot of direction, that just now has meant when, say, someone else starts and they need a little more guidance, well, I'm happy to provide it because why not? I mean,
yeah, you've been in their shoes before. Yeah, you kind of understand.
Yeah, through you when I could just spend 20 minutes and explain yep. something.
So with that premise and that background, then I think like one of the things I would love to do, because my parents still ask me like, what do I do? And and they listen to the podcast too. So help me and help the audience sort of figure out like, let's start with like a e-discovery 101, if you will. Walk us through what e-discovery is and why we should care about it, why it's important.
One little tidbit that I laugh about. So when I worked at an accounting firm, people assumed I did taxes. I don't even do my own taxes. But now that I work at a law firm, they assume I could fix. I'm not an attorney, but two, I don't fix speeding tickets. I don't do divorce. Like that's not even close to what we do. So I think I laugh that it's associations, but
yep, for sure.
So the definition people are most familiar with, if you've seen it, is it's the electronic side of identifying, collecting, and producing electronically stored information. So that's where the ESI part comes from. Mm-hmm. You say that someone reads it, they've never seen it. They're like, I have no idea what that means. And if you think about it at the highest level, it's really, you're just trying to get evidence for your case. Mm-hmm. And if it's your own client's documents, yes, you want to gather that evidence. And on the flip side, you want the other side's documents and data to find support for your case. But backing up a little bit. So most people actually are familiar with ESI. They just might not know it. So like the top data sources we still see are email. That's a source of ESI. Your text messages, your WhatsApp, your social media. Yep. Your entire cell phone, your laptop. I'm trying to think of some more common ones. If you use Zoom or Teams, that's a data source now. And it's just so many of them. And keeping that in mind is that all adds up. And when you go out and start a case, you have to identify what sources your client has and what sources you think the other side may have that you may want to request. And then collect it if it's your own client data. And that just means I usually these days outsource this to someone with forensic experience because it gets very complicated and I don't want to sign the affidavit to doing it, but they will go out and in a forensically sound way, gather that. And then we will, what we usually call processing, we will process it into a database that makes it more usable. So me saying, I got a copy of your cell phone, well, that's not as helpful because now what are you going to do with it? Well, you have to put it somewhere you can actually search. Email, same thing. Take your whole Gmail account. Well, great. There's 150,000 emails. We don't really need all of that. We want to narrow that. So we'll put it in a platform that lets you narrow it. So if I want to search for emails from Brian to myself, that's one way to search, or look for the word attorney lounge or stuff like that. And ultimately, you're just trying to figure out what's responsive to your case that you're going to give the other side. And when you receive the documents, what that they gave you is also relevant to what you're trying to prove.
Yep. Yeah, I kind of always think of the discovery process like my simple mind. I relate so many things to either like a Seinfeld episode or a movie. I remember watching a movie a long time ago, had Harrison Ford in it. I don't remember what the movie was, but like he's some high profile attorney and they have to produce discovery to the other side before electronic ESI and all the stuff we're doing today. And they just basically fill a room full of bankers boxes. They just keep pulling back. And the whole gamesmanship of litigation was just bury the other side with documents where you're looking for the needle in the haystack and it's one page out of millions. And so it's this process of discovery that you go through in litigation that I think a lot of people that just aren't attorneys or aren't familiar with the litigation process don't realize sometimes that in the course of litigation, if it moves beyond the motion to dismiss, you're into discovery. And now you got to turn over all this documentation. And so I always think about it kind of from that movie. And now we don't have banker's boxes anymore. We have a phone that has massive amounts of information in it. And then how are you going to sort through that information to look for that needle in the haystack? And we have all this technology we can use today to do that. So it's helpful to sort of, for the way you described it, to just, I think, sort of lay out the process and how it works.
One thing I didn't mention that makes having electronic data a lot more helpful than, say, paper is metadata, which is a term most people don't know. But I like metadata. I have a t-shirt that says metadata.
Yeah.
It is just data about your data. And the best description I've had for this is, again, going back to your phone, I send you a photo of, I have this fire truck behind me. Look at this photo of this fire truck. Well, based on that one photo, when it was taken, you might have a GPS coordinate. You could look and see who I sent it to. All of those are different data points that when you collect and process data are also searchable. So you can narrow by who you sent it to, date, etc.
Yeah, one of the interesting examples I heard for the use of metadata was a non-compete type scenario where they were careful. They end up sort of using geolocation to sort of identify where the person was traveling. And when it's sort of like, hey, you may not even communicate anything verbally or in text, but your phone is tracking your whereabouts. And so you can use that. And I know in criminal cases, they use that data all the time to solve cases and pinpoint people's location, hit and run cases, things like that. And so all that metadata becomes very important in these types of cases.
Yeah, Dateline University teaches everybody that one. Oh, no,
do you watch that? Do you watch those?
I watch Dateline all the time.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine, the Dateline, she's not a friend of mine, my former assistant general counsel. She is actually, and she has a friend that's a producer, and I can't remember what the show is for, but she actually plays some bit parts.
Oh, really?
In one of those Lifetime or one, yeah. So every once in a while she'll show up as like an extra.
Fact, yeah.
Those are good shows. Those are good shows for sure. And you can learn a lot. So, okay. So walk us through then, okay, just understanding kind of what e-discovery is and the process you go through. So you manage this for lots and lots of projects at your firm. How, walk us through kind of, you go through the forensic collection on the front end all the way through the trial. What does a good process look like?
So it's a long process usually, but it's key is documentation, especially when you're starting out. And I'm kind of in a rare position where I do get to see everything from the beginning of the case with discovery through if it would go to trial, that end, versus having it siloed out. But yeah, when it comes to collection, for example, we usually start by interviewing our custodians. So if you're being sued, you're probably going to get interviewed about your data sources, timeframes involved, who else maybe we need to talk to. And then we'll have whoever's going to do the collection forensically probably do an interview as well with you to sit down and just say, here's how it's going to go. And from there, it'll either, we have relativity in-house, but we've also worked with business partners before to get it into the system. And from there, it's going to be a function of what workflow do you need in your review. And ideally, you have a team of people that can still go through documents, but I mean, we deal with them. Anything lower than 1 million these days is small to me. Which is crazy. I mean, we usually talk about terabytes of data, not gigabytes, and try to do everything we can to cull that universe down. So if you can dedupe it before you let reviewers in, that's usually step one. Take out system files. And then there's the whole concept of email threading where, again, going back to that 100,000 box, say Outlook, Gmail, whatever. Obviously, there's a bunch of strings back and forth. And for review purposes, we don't want our reviewers wasting time looking at 15 versions of the same email string when they can just look at one that includes everything. So using some of the analytics that exist to narrow that universe is always step one. From there, it's just a matter of identifying what issues are relevant to the case, some review guidelines. You will set up a way to have the different attorneys looking at documents tag them, whether they're responsive to the case or not. You may have them tag them confidential or highly, or if it's public information, nothing at all. So there's all these different case-specific coding decisions that'll get made, and there's usually kickoff calls. And once you get through reviewing, it's a matter of pulling together a universe of documents, making sure they're not privileged, because that's always the fear, is producing something privileged, and then you turn them over to the other side. And at the same time, you're probably receiving stuff from the other side as well that also needs to have a whole separate review workflow.
Real quick, I want to recognize our sponsor, Array. Array handles all of the details of litigation so that you can focus on winning your case. They take care of forensic collection, e-discovery, managed review, record retrieval, court reporting, legal staffing and recruiting, trial support, you name it. I'm the general counsel at Array, so I may be a little bit biased, but I was also a client before I started working there too. I've used them on various matters, and they've always delivered. If you're involved in a lawsuit, make Array your first call, and they'll help you get organized right from the beginning. You can reach out to me or visit trustarray.com. Now, back to the pod. You have to go through it. If you don't have a good process, there are serious repercussions for doing it wrong, for deleting data, for not gathering all of the data that was available. You're talking sanctions, you're talking adverse jury instructions. I mean, you can win or lose your case by messing up or doing a good job, I guess. It can be a very strategic part of the litigation process. Done well, I think you can give yourself a significant advantage. Done wrong, I think you can really put yourself behind the 8 ball. Even if the substance of the case is favorable to you, you can blow it if you mess this process up. So any thoughts on sort of that?
Well, and I didn't really even get into the whole preservation side of it. And, again, if anyone wants to learn more about, e-discovery, just search for EDRM, the Electronic Discovery Reference Model. Their website is probably one of the best resources out there. And it takes you through a flow from beginning to end. And beginning is on the info governance, preservation, legal hold side. And you're right, that one really is probably one of the more, it's hard to say which is the most important, but you're right. Something goes wrong there, it trickles through the whole thing. So if something's not preserved, maybe you'll get lucky and there's a backup, but it could be gone forever these days with how some apps auto delete or settings auto delete.
Yeah.
Yes, you're spot on that there's a lot of attention that has to be paid there.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of cases where, this comes up, and there's examples. I think in the Dominion voting machine case against Fox News, there was sort of mess ups in that process. And so I think it's one of these things that it's an interesting area of the law, because I don't think a lot of people know about it necessarily if you're not a litigator or you're in the weeds. Yeah. But it is absolutely critical to any litigation matter. And so, but it's one of those, it's like, in some ways it's like the plumbing in your house or the infrastructure in your house. Like you don't think about it, you don't worry about it until something goes wrong, and then it can just ruin everything.
I kind of like that analogy. Yeah.
You can take it. Yeah. If you want. And you've developed a lot of expertise in this area. You're recognized in the space. And one of the things that we focus on at Array that we always worry about, given how critical this is to any major lawsuit, and given the way that attorneys work night and day, weekends, a lot of times like the substantive work is being done during the 8 to 5 hours, right? And then the discovery and the managed review and all that sort of stuff, the discovery piece of it is kind of being done kind of like outside of those normal working hours where you can dedicate some blocks of time to do it. That puts you on the spot now. Your job is basically 24/7. Is it not?
It definitely can be. And I mean, there's some things, especially on the administrative side of managing a review, have to only be done at night, like updating big indexes or things that require users to really not be in the system, or it's going to slow down. So that's spot on. There's a lot of things that go on at all hours of the day.
Yeah, I heard it described recently as our industry e-discovery is like it's a painkiller, not a vitamin. That we're sort of only, it's hard to get people to focus on it when everything's going well, but when you need it and you want it done immediately. And so I know, like at Relativity Fest this past fall, you talked about burnout. And again, like that's something that we talk about at Array, that we want to make sure that our project managers are having some work-life balance, that they're addressing these things because they're very focused on doing a good job. They get emotionally sort of attached to the case. They want to do a good job. So they're hugely client focused in delivering good results. But then sometimes that can lead to burnout and issues. And so you talked about some of those things that come up at Relativity Fest. Tell me your thoughts on sort of how you address that and try to avoid burnout in this industry.
Yeah, it's far too real. And I've seen it firsthand on several occasions myself. And, one of the first times it probably hit me that I needed kind of to regroup was when COVID hit, actually. COVID was for me a forced break because I was doing something almost every night after work related to industry things, or I would just keep working because I didn't have kids yet. I had this time, and it wasn't even that I was being more productive. I would just do more stuff. And COVID hit and I realized, okay, I need to reprioritize, why am I doing so many things? And then I ended up, now I have 2 small children, which really forced it. And looking back, I made the most mistakes when I was trying to do too much at once. And then I would beat myself up. And then you kind of spiral after that. And so I kind of had to actively try to make things better for me. And it's just been small things like helping manage other people's expectations, where now, unless we have a major deadline, I mean, most of everyone I work with knows if it's between 5 and 8-ish or so, yes, I might have a phone on me, but I might not even have my phone on me. So I'm probably just unavailable until kids go to bed. Or I'm coming in the office a couple times a week, usually still, but I've been blocking out time if there's doctor's appointments, if there's something like this. And I've been making it known. So we have our internal system lets you put a status. And right now mine says recording podcast, but it might say doctor's appointment. It said dealing with sick kids at home may be delayed. It'll say traveling. And I use that as a way to just let people know I'm not really actively ignoring them, but here's what's going on. And actually just having fun as well, kind of keeping things a little less serious. I mean, I became a big fan of all the Gates dogfish memes over the last couple of years when those came out, and then started adding some of my own to the mix. And if you can't laugh about your own industry, what's the point? So finding ways to do that has been beneficial. And I'm one of the people that do work those weird hours you talked about sometimes, because I may play catch up from 9 or 10 p.m. till midnight because I have a gap of time. And while I'm working, I don't expect anyone I'm sending emails to be working as well. So I try to utilize delay, email send, any of those too.
Yeah, I think it's you got to set boundaries for yourself. If you don't, especially in an industry like law where you're making money by billing billable hours, and so people are grinding and trying to get their 2,000 hours in, and they want help, they want it right away. And so setting boundaries for yourself, I think learning to say no. I mean, that I struggle. Like, I tend to be a people pleaser. I want to sort of, I don't ever want to say no. I always want to say yes, I can do it. And then things become overwhelming. So I think those are all important tips. And the other thing I think too, like especially with some of the work from home stuff, is I think the traditional sort of 8 to 5 working hours, like take time off. If you got to do something from 9 to 11, go do it. Because I find the same thing. It's like when I work from home, I just don't stop because it's so accessible. Exactly. Everything's here.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, speaking about you and being actively involved in things, you are very actively involved in a lot of different trade associations, conferences. And so as I've dug into the e-discovery world, it's been interesting to me how many different conferences and trade groups there are. We've run through the list together, but it's and I don't know if this is how you say the acronyms or whatever, ACEDS and ILTA and CLOC and Women in E-Discovery, the Sedona Conference, You got Legal Week, Relativity Fest. You just went to the University of Florida e-discovery conference. There's an ASU e-discovery conference going this week. This industry has just blown up over the last 15 years. There's trade groups, conferences. The law is constantly evolving and changing and staying in touch with all that sort of stuff. You are an active participant in a lot of these different groups. How do you stay on top of all of that stuff in addition to your day job, in addition to being a mom?
Well, and it's funny, the list you read is my cut back list too after COVID. So it's just trying to prioritize, and I'm active in different ones at different times too. And I'm pretty active in ILTA since I have a couple different leadership type roles there at the local level and strategic partner level. But it's been very manageable, I will say. It's at times, if there's a back-to-back conference stuff or back-to-back presentations, okay, it may be a lot at once, but they're nicely spread throughout the year is really how I think it works out for me best. And I may be more selective on not attending a webinar that I might attend if I wasn't super slammed at work, here and there. But I've gained so much, knowledge and so many invaluable relationships and friendships and business partnerships out of all those groups you mentioned that it's well worth my time to make them a priority still.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've noticed too is that, and I think maybe it's because it's kind of a newer industry. People are essentially all founders in this industry, that it's a very welcoming community. I find that sometimes I feel like an outsider, as like a new guy in this world, because when you go to these conferences and stuff and everybody seems to know everybody and everybody seems willing to help everyone else. And that is nice. I mean, because it kind of seems like everybody's sort of been through the trials and tribulations together and sort of the brain damage of figuring this all out and kind of gone through that. Even if you're working for a different organization, you're all kind of working on the same type of stuff. So it seems like there's a lot of friendships that have been built over the last decade in this industry.
You're spot on there. And I think it's also so welcoming because not that long ago, everybody has been that new person who walked into the room knowing nobody and kind of remembers how that feels. So there's, I made a very active effort to, if people reach out to me, say, hey, I see you're attending Legal Week. It's my first time going. I know nobody. Well, I'm glad to. And this actually happened. There were 2 or 3 ladies that reached out to me on LinkedIn saying they were going to be first-time attendees at Legal Week, and I made sure we connected them to 30 other ladies, and we all met up. And it was just one way to actively engage other people so they don't feel like they're by themselves.
Yeah. No, I know. I've at Legal Week this year, I was cruising around with people at Array, and it seemed like every 10 feet, I was walking the show floor with one of my partners, David Vandigriff. He's been in the industry since it began, and he literally would walk 10 steps and run into somebody, and they'd talk about stuff. And then Christine Porras, who's with us.
Christine's great.
She's phenomenal, and she's the same way. Like, she just knows everybody in this industry. She understands the technology. So of the different sort of groups, for people that are interested in learning more, interested maybe in being in this industry, like what do you recommend that people dig into of all these different options that are available? Where would you recommend they focus their attention?
Yeah, for one of the broadest educational resources that I know of is probably ACEDS. So I took the ACEDS certification back, pretty sure it was 2016. And even though I had been in the industry a couple years, I learned a ton from that certification. And it doesn't even have to be the certification. There's other options out there between, I think there's 2 other levels of membership. I don't know them all, but their goal is e-discovery education. So that's always my first point. People try there first if you don't know. If you have something very specific like Relativity or Reveal, Everlaw, like platform-based, most of them have their own training programs and documentation online. And that would make more sense if you wanted the hands-on technical side, maybe to look at one of those. For Women in E-Discovery is free to join. And we don't even have a chapter here in St. Louis, but I'm able to join all the other chapters. Now that there's more webinars, I've joined, I don't know how many cities at this point, chapter meetings, thanks to that. So there's just a ton of resources out there. And again, EDRM's website is just a wealth of knowledge on white papers and glossaries and stuff
Yep.
too. A lot of
And
resources.
as you've sort of kind of circled this circuit multiple times now, you've become well known in the space. You've developed a following. You now have a social media presence. You've got a pretty sizable following online. You're asked to speak at these different events. Talk about what that's like. Do you enjoy sort of having built up a little bit of a presence, and how did that evolve and begin?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy sometimes looking at it. And then the scheme of things, like I'll look at follower count and I'm like, this, I don't track that normally unless somebody brings it up, but it's, I mean, I really can only say I've done it mainly organically. It hasn't been any forced relationships over the years. It's been more these informal chats at, say, a conference have led to, oh, let's talk. Hey, afterwards, can we talk about this in more depth? And then we just kind of expand from there. Or I also went early on, I used to, I mean, I still do for the most part. I try to respond to every like business partner email I get, especially if it's someone I've never heard of. And I'm like, I don't know who are you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, again, starting out, who better to know the industry than those who have been in business development in the industry? So
Yep.
I've
Yep.
over the years met so many people that way that have turned into not just say conference connections or get a coffee meeting here and there, but people we've done business with. Because like you said, everybody wants something now. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
get the most random request ever. And it's like, can you get someone to do this tomorrow? And it's 3 p.m. on a Thursday.
Yeah.
And well, let's find out. So you reach out to connections and be like, any chance you can do X?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beneficial for all parties that way too.
Yeah. And we've talked about this a little bit too. You've taken on some speaking engagements. You're on panels. My career to this point has been, I would describe it as being behind the camera. I'm a support function. I'm not usually as a GC for different companies. The CEO, the CFO, they're the ones that are out kind of promoting the business, and the GC, I'm just sort of there supporting and tackling issues as they come up. Now in this role that I'm in, I'm sort of more forward facing. I'm obviously doing this podcast, getting me out of my comfort zone. What has that been like, sort of being in front of the camera in this role? Do you enjoy being up speaking and doing some of these panels and some of those things?
Yes, I do enjoy it, but I'm still nervous every single time. Like
Yeah.
that sometimes you could probably tell, other times maybe not, but every single time still nervous. I always joke that I was kind of a forced extrovert when I turned 16 and worked in retail. I was always the super shy, kind of nerdy
Yeah.
girl who just keep me out of all of this. But then I got thrown into a retail world and you don't have a choice but to talk to random people. And it just
Yeah.
kind of carried on in different ways since then. But I knew in about 20, I want to say what, 5 years in to my,
Mhm.
or 4 years in, I'm like, I need to find a way to meet others that have even more experience than I do.
Mhm.
Again, I didn't have too many people to bounce off of. So that's when I got more involved with ILTA, which led me to really want to do some of the more speaking engagements because
Mhm.
like if they can do it, why can't I? Let me just,
Right.
and it's kind of just grows from there.
Yeah. Well, and you've developed a lot of industry knowledge. So I think sharing that knowledge and helping people, like you say, with the industry itself being one where people are really enjoy helping one another. And so, yeah, you have a lot of knowledge to share. And so it's great that you're out there doing that. And I think it's one of those things where it may be uncomfortable and may not be sort of what your natural sort of setting is, but recognizing that you got a lot of valuable information to share, and when people want to hear from you, and a lot of times you can be your own worst critic when you're thinking about presenting or posting something online. So
One just extra benefit all these years of being on panels and stuff is I've got to meet so many people, kind of like my counterparts on the other side. So I mean, we're
mhm.
we're all on the plaintiff side, but I mean, some of the people I've learned really, really useful knowledge from are my opposing counsel, technically. And it's just
Yeah.
such a great dynamic to see every side. Most
Mhm.
most conferences these days try to get a good mix of corporate, plaintiff, defense, maybe business partner all together. And I might not have met those people without those experiences.
Yeah. That makes sense. One of the last topics I wanted to cover with you is just, and I've talked about it on a couple of different episodes, is just the growth in this industry and the opportunity that exists. What are your thoughts or advice for either students interested in maybe going to law school or interested in just a career in the legal industry and maybe not going to law school, or how would you sort of think about advising someone that may be interested in this industry?
Well, it's an industry that's not going away anytime soon, that's for sure. So I think if there's an interest, look into it more. Some law schools have programs now. I mean, obviously, University of Florida has a very in-depth program, but some of the other law schools are doing adjunct sessions, symposiums, all sorts of stuff. And it doesn't have to be law school, legal assistants, paralegals, like this e-discovery is touching every aspect in law these days. And I mean, our own paralegals and legal assistants at my firm have exposure to it constantly on cases. And there's just so many opportunities there. Project managers are there's a shortage right now. So if it's something where that's your skill set, I always tell people, if you have the skill sets, you could learn any of the programs, really. It's just, you need the baseline of knowing how to just multitask, manage, document, and be able to adapt, really.
Yeah, the last guest that I had on was the founder of eDiscovery AI, Jim Sullivan, and he said his wife refers to him as a nerd translator. He said, because I can talk tech and I can talk law, and having the ability to sort of merge those two languages together and help people understand when you might speak one but not the other puts you in really high demand.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming more and more necessary too, making sure. It's taken me years, but I'm finally getting brought into protocol discussions and anytime a data source or discovery comes up, real begins. So we're not agreeing to something that doesn't exist, for example, or is not feasible, or maybe there's a better way to do it.
Yeah. I just think there's a ton of opportunity, e-discovery, legal ops, this whole sort of world, and the tech is just evolving so fast with AI coming into the mix as well. There's just, to me, so much opportunity to get involved. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, for people that are entrepreneurial to develop new technology, new programs, new ways of tackling stuff to be as efficient as you possibly can be. And I think it's just coming like a freight train. And so the more I'm in the industry, the more I see the opportunity that exists from being in the space. So for young people that are looking for careers and maybe kind of have that interest in law, whether it's from Dateline or whatever CSI, whatever it is, this is a pretty interesting place, I think, to position yourself.
I think you made a good point too, that it's not just law firms or even corporate, it's the startup community. There's so many openings there as well. Yeah,
I mean, I would look at kind of as a GC, kind of like my dashboard of instruments to sort of fly the legal plane for a big corporation. And more and more and more, the reliance on legal ops is critical to the GC. I mean, you're the co-pilot in that plane because you're managing so many different activities. Litigation is just one aspect of it. You've got your SEC compliance reporting, you got ESG initiatives now, you've got your contract management systems, outside billing systems. I mean, there's technology that's just evolving every single day to give people the tools they need to effectively manage a legal department, and it's coming fast. And so, yeah, I think there's tons of opportunity for people that are developers and want to find a entrepreneurial opportunity in the space. I think there's still plenty of opportunity that exists.
DBAs as well. I mean, people that can manage these large backends of these databases. There's that as well.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered all the topics I was hoping to get to, so I appreciate that. Is there anything you feel like we missed? Anything you want to promote or talk about?
I was going to say, if you're listening to this and going somewhere and you don't know anybody, I mean, feel free to shoot me a message, and I probably will know somebody there if I am not there myself, and be happy to play connector.
That's awesome. No, well, appreciate that. Appreciate you coming on the show, telling your story, giving us the eDiscovery 101. I'll ask my parents after this episode if they understand it better now, and I'll let you know. So appreciate that.
Hopefully something, we'll see.
All right. Well, thanks again to everybody for tuning in to the Attorney Lounge. Thanks to Stephanie Clerkin from Korein Tillery for joining us today. I want to thank our sponsor, Ray, for making this all possible. Please subscribe, and tune into YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts for future episodes. Thanks again, Stephanie. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you.